Today I want to finish my series, and rough series as it's been. The Bible tells me so. I've used this as sort of my theme. This is the second time I've done this since I've been your pastor. It's sort of my adult VBS. One of the things that I get challenged with at times, I'm very challenged, as most of y'all know. But one of the things I get challenged with a lot is I have been in church all of my life. From my very first week of life on, I've been in church, 2, 3, 4, 10, 17, 18 times a week. I have never not lived in the preacher's house. I was preaching the gospel before I moved out of my parents' house. And so every time, it's like I've always been doing this. And one of the things that happens to those of us, dare I say it, old timers, man, we start being in the way. We've been in the way for 40 years, 50 years. And sometimes I just assume everybody knows every story in the Bible. And sometimes I forget there are people that haven't always been around church. There are people who didn't grow up in kids' church. And sometimes I've got to remind myself to go back and preach some of what I consider basic stories. The stories that are the foundation that teach us who God is. And that's what this series is about. And you'll notice that all my sermons this year in this series have been from the Old Testament. I could do a whole series of sermons the same way in the New Testament. But I think it's important for us to understand the basics. And we've talked about Gideon and his 300, and we've talked about Samson and his life, and we've talked about Daniel and the lion's den, and we've talked about somebody else. I'm trying to think who we talked about. We did Samson and Gideon and Daniel. No, was it Abraham? Abraham and Isaac. Yes, it was Abraham and Isaac. And those are foundational stories. But there's another story that is foundational that we don't talk about enough, especially in adult services. Now, we talk about Moses a lot. We talk about Moses in the burning bush, and we talk about Moses and crossing the Red Sea, and we talk about the miracles that God did in the wilderness. But too many times we don't go back and talk about Moses as an infant. And today I want to talk about, actually probably more than Moses, I want to talk about somebody who in this passage is unnamed. And that is Moses' mother. When I was putting this sermon together, I actually thought this would actually be a very good Mother's Day sermon. But so moms, I'm going to give you an extra Mother's Day sermon, okay? But I think it applies to all of us. I want to preach a sermon entitled Creative Obedience. Creative Obedience. I want you to open your Bibles with me today. Amen. Exodus chapter 1, we're going to read verse 22. Exodus chapter 1, verse number 22. The New Living Translation reads this way. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, that you may let the girls live. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, Lord, I come to you right now and I thank you for your power. Thank you for your mercy. Lord, I thank you for the message that you poured into my heart this week, for this day and this hour. Lord, I want you to bless us. Lord, get me out of the way and speak what you want to speak to your people. Lord, we thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Creative obedience. When I look at that title, I have to give you a little bit of a backstory. I grew up in a very creative house. Dad is creative. Mom is extremely creative. Anybody that knows Pastor Mom knows that she has always got a different idea. Let's do this. Let's try that. People ask me often, where did I get my illustrated sermons from? I remember Dad preaching one, and that was Dragging Dead Lions. That's the only one I remember Dad preaching. But every time we finally got Mom to start teaching and preaching, she still says she's not a preacher. How many of you know that's not exactly the truth? But every time she teaches or preaches, she has some sort of illustration. But it was always creative in our house. My brain is a scary place to live. It is one of the positive outflows of ADHD's creativity. And I remember growing up as a kid, I really didn't need a lot. I had a lot as an only child, but I would create my own stories in my head. I had my own friends. I had my own, I had a bunch of stuffed animals, and they all had a different voice that they spoke with in my head. My boys were very creative. My oldest son, dear Lord, I couldn't punish him, because the greatest thing you could do is go tell him to sit in the corner, because he didn't need a TV, he didn't need a radio. He'd just sit there and tell his own stories. Michael, my youngest son, he created an entire world that he talked about often. And he's looking at me like, how far are you going to go, Dad? He gave me the go ahead. He had a whole world where the dolphins flew in the sky, and the Barbies lived on the earth, and the dolphins and the Barbies were at war. This isn't a one-time story. This is something he went on for years and years and years. The way our minds work, we think differently. And so when I hear that word, creative obedience, you know what I think of? I think of, how can you get around something? My dad used to say, it's become my boys have made it. It is our family crest saying, where there is a will, there is usually relatives. Which means that, when you got a desire to do something, there's going to be a lot of different ways to come about doing it. And every time we would face a problem, that's what he would tell me. Where there's a will, there's usually relatives. We would fix things, but they might not be fixed the right way, but they would work. I do that a lot. I fix things the wrong way. But they work. And so when I think of creative obedience, I think of that, this is what I'm told, but how can I get around what they're trying to get me to do? And when I look at this story, that phrase fits. When you understand here that Jacob has risen to power in Egypt, he has brought his family, has now come, and though they had tried to kill him, he told them, though you meant it for evil, God meant it for good, to save a nation. And all of his family had come to Egypt during the famine. They had lived in the land of Goshen. They had begun to grow. And then, as the Bible says here in the first chapter of Exodus, many years had passed, and all of a sudden, nobody was left that knew who Joseph was. Nobody was left that knew how powerful he was and why the Jewish people were there. But all of a sudden they had grown and grown and grown to the place that the Pharaoh looked and said, if we don't control them, they're going to be bigger than us and take us out. And so Pharaoh told the midwives to kill every boy. And the midwives didn't do it. They said, well, the Jewish women are strong and they have their babies before we get there. So he ends chapter 1 with this decree where Pharaoh gives this order and says, throw every Hebrew boy into the Nile River. You can let the girls live, but get rid of the boys. Ooh, now I could preach a whole message on that. Because I'm telling you right now, our society is trying to kill the boys. If they don't kill them physically, they kill them emotionally and mentally. They're trying to attack men. Men, we need to be men. God called us to be men. But that's not my sermon today. All of a sudden, they're living in a time where the idea is to stop the spread of the Israelites. Now, I find this very important, and again, let me give some thoughts that run into my brain. I find it interesting that when God is raising up a Moses that is going to deliver his people, the government in power at the time and at the place killed babies. When God is raising up a Messiah in Jesus Christ, the government in power at the time killed babies. As God begins to rise up a generation that is going to see the end time revival and the preparation for the return of Jesus Christ, I think it is only understandable that governments would kill babies. And we have had hundreds of thousands, millions of infants killed through abortion in our country and around the world. I believe that this is a picture of why. Because the enemy is out to stop the redeemed. The enemy is out to stop those that are coming for a purpose. But when we get into chapter 2, as Paul Harvey would say, some of you are old enough to know who I'm talking about, we find the rest of the story. Chapter 2 starts off, says, about this time, and a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married. Now, let me tell you something. In those days, people didn't get married just to get married. They got married to have kids. And especially in the Jewish culture, they didn't get married just to have a kid. They got married to have a bunch of kids. And so they get married, and guess what? Because they got married, she becomes pregnant. They start doing what married couples do. They start having kids. But now we understand that there is a decree, there is a law that says every Jewish boy must be thrown into the Nile River. Now, we find out later that it is understood that the baby wasn't their first child. The baby has a sister that is older than he is. They've had a baby since this decree went in order, but it was a little girl, so everything was okay. But then, according to verse 2, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was special. He was a special baby. How many of you ever have looked at your kid and said, he's not special? I looked at both of mine and said, man, they're special. I grew up an only child. I didn't know what it was like to have brothers or sisters. I was a little concerned, how's this going to be having two? But man, Anthony and Michael were completely different. They had different personalities. Even as infants, there was different, and they were special each in their own way. They were special in what they brought to the table. And so even as infants, she looked and she said, this boy is a special baby. But she also, when she says the boy is a special baby, I believe what she's saying is there is a call on this child. Oh, this child, they're going to do something. Yeah. See, I've said that. I've seen that. I've watched my boys grow into creative thought, into creative problem solving, into all these things that I saw when they were kids. Says she saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. The first thing that I saw that this mother did is she hid him as long as she could. She hid him as long as she could. She said, listen, I'm going to hide this baby. And when the baby's little, it's a little easier to hide. Their cries are a little quieter. They don't have a whole lot of power. They start getting, how old is he now? How old is she now? 7 months. See, her cry's a little louder than it used to be. A little bigger, a little harder, It's easier to keep a little baby hidden. I mean, my first son was 4 pounds 2 ounces at birth. We brought him home at 4 pounds 9 ounces. Passed him around on a pillow. And when I remember when we finally, about 3 months, we went out to go to the mall. And by that time, he had grown to a whopping 7 pounds something. And everybody's like, you shouldn't have that newborn out like that. Like, he's 3 months old. He was a preemie. But, we walked around, everybody thought we had a newborn. And he was little. It would have been easy to hide him. Michael came out big. Imagine that. But still, as a little baby, he would have been easier to hide. But the time comes that Moses starts getting too big. One of the things that we do a lot of times with our faith is we get saved and maybe we don't tell people. Oh, I'm going to hide this as long as I can. What'd you do this weekend? Oh, I went and saw some friends. Oh, well, we don't want to do. What would they think if we said we went to church? I don't know. Let me keep this hidden. But the more and more and more you get close to what God's got, the more you understand the specialness of what God has, the more that it becomes hard to hide. It becomes hard to hide our faith. It becomes hard to hide what God is doing. This woman has this gift from God, and she tries to keep him hid. Let God give you a gift. If God gives you the gift of singing, and you can sing or you play an instrument, you can hide it for a while, but as soon as Brother Bobby hears it, I ain't going to be hiding it no more. It's going to be, oh, no, you need to be part of this. Have a gift with kids. I worked for a while until Jennifer and Andrea get a hold of you. And have a gift of teenagers. Miss Rachel wants to know you right now. And all of a sudden, we have our gifts and we try to hide them, but there comes a place you just can't hide them anymore. If you keep them, they're going to be seen. If she kept this baby, punishment was coming. So she had to get creative. But she's a child of God. And if she's an Israelite, she believes in God, she needs to obey the rulers of those over her. So what does she do? The next thing that I see she does is she obeyed the order. The order was that every newborn Hebrew boy should be thrown into the Nile River. Verse 3 is what it says. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of cypress reed and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. You know what she did? She took her baby that she had hidden, and she put her baby in a basket. And she prepared the basket. The law said that she had to throw the baby into the Nile River. She does something creative. She put the baby in the Nile River. But she did it in a little baby-sized boat. Moses was the first person to ever have an infant bass boat. She took the baby and she was creative in what she did with it. She moved beyond, I've got to throw this out. She said, there's got to be a way. Church, I don't know. I don't know exactly how to describe what's in my head. But can I tell you, too many times, we don't stop enough and say, God, what can I do to prepare my future? Too many times we don't get creative enough. We don't. We hear the rule that says we got to throw the baby in the Nile. And we love the baby. And we go, I love the baby. But the law says I got to throw it in the Nile, so I can't do. Poor baby's got crazy arms. It's a Pentecostal baby. Anyway. All of a sudden, instead of stopping and praying and asking God to give us wisdom and understanding and an idea, the world says, faith isn't real. Okay. Beliefs are subject to your mind. Oh, you're right. There's no absolute truth. Truth is whatever you think and whatever I think, and your truth and my truth are not the same truth. I got news for you. We hear a society right now that is telling us to throw our faith into the Nile River. It's not real. And too many times we say, I can't. All of a sudden, we give up too easy. Society tells us that there's better things to do on a Sunday morning than come to church. You're too busy. You're too tired. You're too this. You're too that. You need to just quit worrying about going to church. You can have God without church. You're right. I'll just throw church in the Nile River. And all of a sudden, we give up. We just give up. But you know what I see about Moses' mother? She didn't give up. She had looked at the baby. She loved the baby. And she said, there's got to be a way that I can obey the law and still protect my child. She didn't know what was going to happen. Some of you know the story, and you know where this is going to end, and you're like, well, she knew what. No, she had no idea what was going to happen. We're going to find out, or actually it's a verse I'm not reading in the story. If you'll go read the story for yourself. Again, I encourage you, every time I preach, go and read the stories that I preach about for yourself. Some of you too busy drinking the milk of the preaching instead of getting into the meat of the word. Come on now. Y'all need to be here tonight at 6 o'clock for dinner, church, because that's what I'm preaching about tonight. But all of a sudden, we get so caught up in these ideas that we forget to stop and say, God, what can I do? Give up your faith. Lose your commitment. Forget your morals. Oh, there's something we don't talk about anymore in the church. Quit being set apart. That's called sanctification. Look like the world, act like the world, talk like the world, do what the world does, and then just claim you're a Christian because you go to church. We're throwing our relationship into the Nile. Actually, what we wind up doing is we wind up throwing our relationship into the Nile. We deny that we've got a relationship. We deny that we're different. We deny that we've set apart. No, I'm just like everybody else. And news for you, I don't want to be like everybody else. I don't want to be like everybody else. But this woman, she stops and she says, what can I do? God, it's a law. I can't keep him no more. And she gets creative. And she makes the basket and she puts him in a basket. You see, what she has prepared is a way to be obedient, but also a way to trust God for provision. When she placed this basket in the Nile, she had no idea. The Nile River is, if I understand right, has alligators, crocodiles, and those are different animals. And all kinds of things in it that would have loved to have the snack of a baby Moses. She didn't know what was going to happen. She put it among the reeds. Guess where they would be? Among the reeds. And she puts it in there. Well, Pastor, she still threw the baby out. No, she didn't. She set the baby up for God's miraculous provision. Let me tell you something. Some of us don't get the full blessing out of the gifts that God has given us because we never set our gifts out for God to bless. Can I talk to the parents in the room for just a second? Your kids are blessings to your life, but they are given to you by God for you to care for and then set them out to change the world. Mama, somewhere you got to cut the apron strings. Somewhere you got to set them out in the Nile River in a basket with tar and pitch on it among the reeds where all the alligators and crocodiles, all of a sudden all these things, all these danger, oh, I can't put the baby out there, there's too much danger. You know the biggest challenge to ministry calls among young people? Parents. You don't believe that? Let your teenage son or daughter come and tell you that they believe they're called to go to the mission field. Well, now I don't know. 1996, about a week after My oldest son was born, Anthony. Anthony was 8 weeks premature. We had a trip scheduled with the youth group to take, I think it was about 15 or 20 kids, to the Olympics, the 96 Olympics in Atlanta. And we were going to go down there and we were going to do street ministry. We were going to be around the main park pavilion there doing street ministry. We were going to go into some of the rough parts of Atlanta and do some street ministry. We had this trip all laid out. We'd been working on it, and all of a sudden, Anthony comes 8 weeks premature. He's still in the NICU. We're still trying to figure out this little 5-pound baby. And I'm like, folks, I can't go to Atlanta. So one of my youth workers steps up and says, I can get off work. I'll lead the trip. I'm like, all right. So everybody's good. We're going. Saturday morning before they're supposed to leave Sunday night, the Olympic Park bomb went off. Some of you that were alive back then, you'll remember there was a bombing in the Olympic Park. And I was picking up the rental van we had, taking them down there, and my pastor, I called him. I said, what do we do? And I said, I'm not going. Now there's bombs going off. This is pre 9/11, so terrorism. I mean, Oklahoma City had happened, but we didn't know what to think. And I remember we said we're gonna plan as if we're going. We're going to do a meeting with the parents after church on Sunday morning, and we will decide there what's going to happen. If the parents say no, we're just going to cut the trip. And that service was over. I went into that meeting fully expecting to cut the trip. I go in, I'm sitting there with the parents, say, look, you already know I'm not going on this trip because of my son being born. This youth worker's going, this is happening, that's happening. Now the bombs went off, and the parents are all like, well, we're worried about danger, we're worried about this. It sounded like the trip was heading down. We were throwing it into the Nile. And all of a sudden, one of my teenagers raised his hand. He said, Pastor Tommy, can I say something? I said, yeah, go ahead. Matthew Clark spoke up. He said, you guys always tell us to trust God and that God will take care of us, but when you get a chance to trust us with God, you tell us we can't do it. And the room got deathly quiet. The next word that was said was one of the parents said, what time's the bus leaving tonight? And those kids went to Atlanta, had a life-changing experience in Atlanta, ministered to people, saw people get saved, came back safe. You know why? Because a young person was able to speak out and get the adults to think, somewhere, I got to put it out there and trust God to take care of it. Can I tell you, it's not just about your children. It's about your ministry. It's about your dreams. It's about your abilities. Sometimes you got to put it out there and trust God to take care of it. But it could die. I can tell you for sure, if you keep it hid, it is going to die. But if you will prepare the basket for it and say, look, I'm going to put this out there and I'm going to give it an option. I'm going to let God say, okay, now God, this is yours. Hardest thing for us to do is take our talents, our callings, our desires, and take our hands off of it. And say, okay, God, you do what you want to with it. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to believe in you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe that it'll be okay. Oh, Pastor, I can't tell you the things that are in my heart because you'll think I'm crazy. That's okay, I'm crazy. Not that big of a deal. I don't know what to do with this call that I have in my life. Put it out there. Who knows what's going to happen with it? I can tell you, when she put Moses in that basket, he did not come out of that basket leading the children of Israel out of captivity. There was a process that had to go through. When she put him in that basket, she said, okay, I'm going to trust God. To the point that she sent his older sister to watch and see what happened. Notice the implication here. She fixed the basket, she put him in the Nile, and she went home. Now I think there's a couple reasons why she went home. Number one, she didn't want to watch. She didn't want to see. She didn't want to see if an alligator came and ate that basket. But I think it's also possible, she says, now I've got to go back about my life and trust God with my gift. I got to go back. Some of us are, I don't know if anybody knows any parent like this. Some of us would have been like this. You know, the helicopter parent. Oh, I got to make sure this is all right. Oh, it's floating the wrong way. Take hands off of it. Trusting God is not about holding the basket. Trusting God is about placing it in the Nile River and letting it go. Some of us have got to give our blessing. We've got to give our talent. Might as well go here. I'm a Pentecostal preacher. Some of us, it's about giving our money. Oh, Pastor, I'll give money, but I want to make sure it goes this. We do direct offerings. That's okay. But what happens when we just say, there, God, do with it what you want? Well, what if it gets misused? Your faithfulness was the key. Your faithfulness was the key. It's not about what. When you give an offering, if I or the board misuses that offering, we have to pay that penalty. God will deal with us. That's why I try not to deal with money. Dolly, you got a money question. Anybody got a money question, just go ask Dolly. If Dolly ain't around, you can ask Becky. Becky's going, I don't want nothing to do with the money. Let me tell you something. When we give it to God, we let it go. Okay. Just do it. When we give our talent to God, what if your talent doesn't go where you want it to go at first? I'm a young preacher. Obviously, I'm talking about a long time ago. But I was a young preacher. I was at college. I'd evangelized 2 summers, preaching full-time on the road, evangelizing. I'd been my dad's youth pastor for a year and went back to Lee. And when I got back, I went into North Cleveland Church, one of our large churches there in Cleveland. And they have a lot of satellite churches. And I thought, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk to their director of evangelism, and I'm going to see if I can't pastor one of their outreach churches. Because I've got it together. I mean, I knew a lot of guys in school that they were going to be preachers. They were studying the ministry, and they had not preached their first sermon yet. And I'd already been full-time, 2 summers full-time, preaching, 4 or 5 nights a week. And man, I got this. Man, I'm somebody. I have given my talent to God. Yes. And I went in and I sat down. They go, "We're so glad you came. God has got a place for you." And I'm like, "Yes, I'm going to pastor a little church." And they sent me to a nursing home. Now, you have to understand, when I was about 10, I went to the nursing home with my mom and dad. And as we were standing in the lobby, a dear, sweet lady that I didn't know confused me for somebody she knew. And she said, "He's so cute." And she grabbed me and she kissed me all over my face. When I got out of her grip, I went and got in the car. I didn't say nothing all the way home. We get home, I go straight to the bathroom and I wash my face. Probably the first time I'd ever willingly washed my face. I wash my face and I come back out and I announce to my mother, I will never go back to a nursing home again. And the rest of my life, when they would do nursing home services, I didn't go. I ain't going. I ain't going in there. I ain't going in there. I ain't going. Not doing it. I'd preached one revival for a church that was doing nursing home service. Wanted me to go preach. I'm like, "Okay, God." And I preached, but I stayed away from the people. I was like, no, I'm still hiding my baby. Now I'm here, thinking that I've given my gift. And they're going to put me in a nursing home? Really? That's what they're going to do? But I let them. Beth and I wasn't married yet, but we did this together. And for about 10 weeks, while their normal guy that pastored that nursing home was on a work training and wasn't able to be there, we went into this nursing home. We went in a couple weeks with him. I'll never forget his standard was you get there early, you walk around the halls, you invite people to church. If they could not tell you no, you willed them to church. Had nurses that brought in people in beds. They couldn't get out of the bed, but they would bring the bed in. Had several nursing and cleaning staff that were working there that attended church, but they had to be at work, so they would sit in the service. On average, we'd have about 60 or 70 people between the patients and the others there, fill up a little room. And some of the sweetest people in the world. Some others, did you get that? There were some of the sweetest people in the world and some others. I'm preaching one day, and one of the patients in a bed, laying there. And all of a sudden, about half, 3/4 of the way through my sermon, she goes, "Is he done yet?" How many of y'all would like to say that? Anyway. But Beth and I, Beth sat with a lady just about every week. Lady was convinced that Beth was her aunt, her niece. And she would sit with Beth until the bus was going to come, because the bus was going to come and take her to town. There was no bus coming. And Beth said, "Well, we'll just sit here and wait for your bus while we're listening to service." It became the best ministry training I've ever had. It became the most awesome experience. Had a group of ladies there, loved us. We had a guy there, I can't remember his name now. He came every service, and he would close every service out with a harmonica solo. And he would get up and tell us what he was playing. I'm glad he did, because we couldn't tell. And I would shake everybody's hand, and the little ladies, they were so sweet. They'd say, he doesn't know how to play, but we let him play anyway. And those ladies and those men taught me. They taught me what love was. They taught me what mercy was. They taught me the art, the responsibility of preparing a word every week. And that power of that nursing home that I pastored was greater than anything I thought. I wanted to have a building, and I wanted to have an outreach church that I could. But God knew what I needed. And when I took my hands off of it and I said, okay, I'm not going to say no to this, then all of a sudden God took what I had and he said, now let me show you how I can bless you. She puts Moses in the Nile and she leaves him there. You know what happens? Pharaoh's daughter finds him. He's cute. He's adorable. His sister comes out from hiding and she says, hey, you want me to find somebody to take care of him till he gets older? Somebody to nurse him? And Pharaoh's daughter says, yes. God blessed her creative obedience. God said, I'm going to take what you have, what you've done, what you've let go, and I'm going to bless it. Listen to this, verse 5 and 6. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby, the little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. When you read on in the story, the sister comes. You know who the sister takes Moses to be nursed? Mama. Can you imagine that? Now your daughter walks back into the house with your baby boy that you just put in the Nile. What are you doing? We're supposed to let go of that. And she says, oh, Mama, the princess asked if you would take care of this baby. The princess asked if you would nurse him. The princess asked if you would take care of him. And she got to take care of and nurse her own child until he was old enough to be weaned. She got to keep him. But guess what happens again? When it comes time for him to be weaned, she now has to say, take him back. Take him back. You see a pattern? Moses' mother had to constantly be giving Moses away, or Moses would have never led the children out of Egypt. Without us constantly willing to give our greatest gifts away, you know, it's funny. I think of this, and I talk about always giving away, and then I think about little Rain here. Rain is actually in her mama's hands right now. Look at you smiling at me. Yeah, you know I'm talking about you. Yeah. She's in her mama's arms right now, but half the time I see Rain, she's in somebody else's arms. Dear Lord, she gets held by more people than our kids did, man. As youth pastors, man, every teenager in the church had our kids. We had the number system in the nursery, and kids would come, and They would go to Beth and go, I'll go get Anthony or I'll go get Michael. Beth would give them the number. Because we had to tell them, don't give them to anybody that doesn't have the number. Man, I'd be talking, I'd turn around and one of the kids got Anthony or Michael, whichever one, walking over here. I got one of my boys in South Carolina thought Anthony was the greatest pickup artist in the world. Because he would come to the house and pick Anthony up at about 2 or 3 years old, 3 and 4, and take him to the mall with him, take him out running around with him. I said, what are you doing? He goes, all the girls come talk to me when I got the baby. Man, I'm going to tell you right now, Anthony was better at picking up girls when he was 18 months than he is now. But all of a sudden, she again had to say, okay. When she gave him back, then Pharaoh's daughter. Later, when the boy was older, the mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. Hear that. Mother, who at least at this point, and I'd have to go through and restudy it, but at least at this point is nameless. Gets to nurse her child, saves her child's life, but then hands him off to Pharaoh's daughter, who then adopts him as her own son. You know what that means? She named him. She adopted her as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, I lifted him out of the water. I lifted him. This woman, man. Pharaoh's daughter says, I'm going to name him Moses because I lifted him out of the water, never knowing that he was going to be the one that was going to lift his people out of bondage. But his real mom's right there. We don't even have a record of what his mother called him. We don't have a record of what she called him. At least at this point, again, I don't remember if her name is given later, but at least at this point in the biblical record, her name isn't even given. But the deliverer, the one that's going to save the nation, the one who would talk to God as a man talks to his friend, the one who would lift up a staff and part the Red Sea, is there because one woman had creative obedience. She says, I'll put him in the Nile, but I'm going to do it in a basket that floats. And I'm going to trust God to take care of the rest. And then he's brought back, and she says, I'll nurse him, I'll prepare him, I will let him grow. But when the time comes, I'm going to take him back to Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter adopted him. He was the only Egyptian royalty got education. Moses got education. When Moses left as a 40-year-old man to go hide on the backside of the desert, he left as an educated man. He had already been taught how to lead. He had been taught in the schools of the Pharaohs. So 40 years later, when he comes back, he's not talking in a realm he don't understand. He understands the palace. He understands what happens there. Why? Because his mother gave him. Here's my challenge today. What can you give? What can you give? I'm not talking about money. Some of you here today need to give your kid. Man, I talk to parents all the time. Your kids can't do what God intended them to do if you keep hanging on to them. Man, when I meet a kid like Ashley, you can ask Rachel. I've talked to her many times. Ashley's got a call. It's going to pull her away. You're going to have to let go. God's led Ashland away. This may just be a small distance now. It may be much greater later. God's refreshed that even where she's at. All of a sudden, we begin to look. And we got to say, okay, I got to trust. I'm living it. My son, man, I want him to be committed and excited about a Pentecostal Church of God church, running the aisles and jumping. And that's not where he's at. He's committed. He's very committed. He's full, but it's a different kind of church. They believe in Jesus. They believe Jesus lived, died, rose again. That he paid the price for our salvation. I have no doubt that my son will be in heaven. But for him to walk out the faith that he's walking out, I've had to take my hands off. It's okay. All right. But when he starts talking to me about the scriptures he's read or the prayers that he's prayed, or asking me for prayer, or this week he went through some stuff and he called and asked me for prayer, and then he called back and he said, man, things went really good. Thank you for praying. And I remember he understands that power. He'll call every once in a while and say, tell Mima to get in her chair. He's in a different basket. I gotta let go. But maybe it's not your kid. Maybe it's your ministry. Maybe it's your heart. Maybe it's your abilities, your talents that you just keep hid. I don't want anybody to know that I do that. And God said, look, put it in a basket. Let it roll. Let me have what I've given you. When you give it away, I can use what you have. I can use your talent. I can use your blessing. I can use your ability in ways you never dreamed. God gave me a talent. He gave me an ability. That ability is to get up in front of people and not be afraid. Had that, tell everybody, I had the gift of gab since I could learn to talk. I talked all the time. I used to jokingly say I became a preacher because I decided if I was going to church, I was going to be the one talking, not the one quiet. But I had to give it to God. He gave me a creativity. And please understand, I'm not trying to be boastful here. But he gave me a creativity in my mind. And then he gave me the boldness when I would give that, and I finally learned to give that creativity to God. When I would see a Bible story in a way that was a little different, or in a way that had a visual component to it, I started finding ways to put that into the sermon. And what does it do? It ministers to people. Sometimes they don't remember what I preached, but I remember what I did. How many of you remember a toilet? Yeah. You may not remember what I preached with the toilet, but you know I had a toilet sitting up here on the front of the church. Who thinks of bringing a toilet get to church, somebody with a creative mind that says, okay, God, when you give me the idea, I'm going to give it back. You know, there's some creative outreaches in this room. There's some creative ministries in this room. There's some talents in this room I don't have. Dear Lord, Tina, she can go up to anybody. Talk. She can find out what they need, and then she can go to every store and find it half price. I've never seen anybody with the gift of sales like Tina. It's almost scary because she'll find out you need something. Next thing you know, she can bring you 14 of them. Here, I got them for a penny a piece. I'm like, oh, I only needed one. If we will take the creativity, take the gift, and just give it to God. Some of you, it's your life. See, many of us in this room, we've already given our life to God. I said, God, I know when I rededicated my life and I truly gave my heart to Him, I was just a teenager, but I said, God, what I got's not worth anything. But I'll give it to you. And when I gave it to Him, He fashioned it into something. He found my gifts. He found my strengths. And as long as I keep giving it to Him, He keeps using this strange, weird kid, man, old dude, whatever I am, to share His gospel. Some of you, you need to make that step this morning to give your heart to God. God. Some of you are hiding your heart right now. You're hiding your heart. You're hiding your love. You're hiding your life. You feel like you're always behind a curtain. You're not open with anybody. You're lonely because you don't give yourself. And God is telling you today, give yourself to Him first. And then He can do something with what you got. He can rip that curtain. He can tear down that wall that you built up around yourself. That image that you stay hid behind. If you will trust God, He will change you.